September 1970, James Marshall Hendrix died, leaving the world to mourn the loss of rock's finest guitarist and most explosive performer. This is the story about the life and career of a flamboyant star. From his early beginnings to his innovative albums, such as Are You Experienced and Electric Ladyland. A story told by those who knew him best.
Jimmy was very, very unique. You know, I've heard stories where people came to look at him almost as like a sideshow attraction, but soon found out that he was a guy who was doing acrobatics on a guitar, you know, nobody'd seen before.
He made those records. He did what he wanted to do. That was his vision. Those records came out sounding the way he wanted them to sound.
Was nobody like him. Nobody. There were a lot of guitar players, but they weren't like Jimmy, you know?
And he was so unique at it. He was an original. He was original. He didn't copy anybody. He was his own self. And that's why he became successful, because he was unique. And there was nobody like him that ever came along.
John Allen Hendrix was born on November the 27th, 1942, in Seattle, Washington. Hendrix, originally raised by his mother Lucille, later went to live with his father Al, who then changed his first son's name to James Marshall Hendrix.
Growing up in Seattle with Jimmy was pretty fun for me. Jimmy was in charge of babysitting me while my father was working, you know, late hours. There was a secure feeling about Jimmy. It seemed to be like he was warm and he was like, you know, fatherly to me. And I always felt secure that everything was all right. And it was just me, Jimmy, and my dad living at home by ourselves. He was in charge of me. You know, and sometimes I saw Jimmy more than I saw my father. Jimmy had a very mellow personality, you know. He had this essence about him that was like really different. You know, he never hollered, he never cussed, he never got upset. He was always thinking about music. And he treated me the same way. You know, he never yelled at me. I got one black eye through my whole childhood, and I think that's pretty good for a little brother. Jimmy was shy because he was always thinking. You know, you could put Jimmy in a room with a lot of people, and he couldn't be social because he had music racing through his brain like a freight train. You know what I'm talking about? And sometimes you say, Jimmy, are you paying attention to me? And he goes, wait a minute, there's just no coming through. You know what I'm talking about?
I grew up with Jimi Hendrix. I was 13. We were going to middle school, and we used to hang out together. You know, he was a good friend of my brother's, basically, you know. He'd tell jokes all the time. He loved comics. I mean, and a hell of a nice guy, you know what I'm saying? But very laid back and shy, you know, very shy. People talked about him a lot because he was so different, you know. But he was just a cool kind of guy, man, you know what I mean?
Growing up with Jimmy when he first started to play guitar was like, it was strange for me because Jimmy he was into sounds. You know, he would stretch a rubber band across the bed. We had this brass bed, you know, with the poles and stuff like that. And he would stretch strings and rubber bands, and he would make all these sounds and plucking sounds. And finally, my father, you know, came across this old ukulele with one string on it. And then pretty soon he finally got a guitar, you know, from a hawk shop for $5. And that's when he really started to, you know, pass by the sports, pass by the social activity of all his friends in the area, and start whamming on that guitar. You know, like he had a lot of friends, but when Jimmy started playing guitar, the friends kind of was jealous of Jimmy because, you know, they used to run around together and play baseball and stuff, and here's Jimmy, all he wants to do is pluck on that guitar. I remember this one story where me and Jimmy were at the park, and Jimmy's playing guitar on the hill, you know, in some bushes, and his friends came along and said, Jimmy, come and play, man, come and play. And Jimmy said, no, I want to play guitar. And they kept saying, come on, Jimmy, come on. And so then they kind of gathered around a little bit, and they said, let me see your guitar, right? And so Jimmy said, okay, because, you know, Jimmy was humble. Jimmy was like a really good guy. So he said, okay, here. And so they took off running across the field. And Jimmy was so upset, man. He was chasing them guys, you know, you could see the dust, you know, and the guys were teasing him, you know, passing the guitar back and forth from each other.
Jimmy always had his guitar with him. When I first knew him, he had a Dan Electro guitar, and I had a Dan Electro bass. That was kind of the bottom of the line, but it played and it was electric and it was great. And he would always carry that with him, slung over his back, no case, just his guitar. And you know, he was just wherever he was always playing with that guitar, always working on new licks, trying to come up with something new.
My brother played keyboards and I played guitar and Jimmy played guitar. That's how we struck up a friendship. You know, we used to play together daily. I mean, you know, write songs, drank wine together, you know, did things that kids actually did, you know what I'm saying? When we were small, go fishing, you know, sleep in the parks and, you know, and just have a good time, doing a lot of things that kids did when we were small, you know, play cowboys and Indians, I mean, you know. And when we used to jam together, we used to just exchange licks and, you know, he'd show me songs and we'd write songs together. And I'd show him stuff that I learned, say, Jimmy, hey, look at this, check this out, Jimmy, what do you think? And he'd show me some of the things that he had created. And we'd jam daily, on a daily basis, you know. We had paper routes together, you know. We'd take our guitars, our little acoustic guitars.
Jimmy never had any guitar lessons. Jimmy heard it. Jimmy heard a music that floated through the air, and you know, and he wanted to grab it. He wanted to bring it down, and that's the only time that he heard the music, and he wanted it, and he reached for it, and he attained it.
Jimmy never took any lessons, you know, just gathered stuff from around the neighborhood, different cats. I'd play and he'd play, and Randy and Purnell would play, and he'd pick up all this shit and add his own flavor to it, and he was a monster. Jimmy was playing bass, though, on a 6-string guitar years ago, before basses were, I mean, you know, really out.
Jimmy's early musical influences were shaped from listening to local Seattle bands such as the Sharps and the Dynamics. Music historian Peter Blecker has carried out significant research into Jimmy's early musical years.
Prior to getting his guitar, he had already been a fan of the local bands. He went and saw bands like the Sharps, the Dynamics, the Frantics, Little Bill and the Blue Notes, and the Dave Lewis Combo was probably his favorite band. And so he went to the dances, he went to the shows in the armory halls and the community centers, places like that. So we know that he had an interest in music there. The next important